It's August 8th, 2024, and I'm Mr. John J. Jeckovich. We're reading his book. They're titled Their Mother's Sons, and we're on page 387. And this chapter is entitled Catacombs and Revoir. Let's see. You're looking chipper today, Mr. Jeckovich.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
You're looking very nice with your new clothes on.
And nice new shirt, new sweater here.
Clothes on. Well, do you want to read or do you want me to?
You read it, go ahead.
Okay, I'll need your dog tag number as a passcode to open it up.
42965.
Okay, here we go. The thought of Renee entering a religious order persuasion left me in awe and stupefaction. Now that she was incapable of becoming an outstanding, not that she was not incapable of becoming an outstanding nun, but a woman of her beauty and charm just did not fit my picture of someone resolved to monastic life. She was too full of life and independence of thought to be relegated to a strict discipline of the monastery. I was well aware that she possessed a great amount of selflessness and well as being self-composed, which bordered almost on self-denial. What would drive a person to such an extent she would give up all earthly belongings and much more to lead a life of loneliness and self-denial, especially a person such as Renee, who had boundless and productive life ahead of her. It would be interesting as well as enlightening to see as what extent she would confide in me. There were not much going on at the hospital outside of the review of our individual cases, some extraneous paperwork and training film, and a bit of calisthenics. Most of the time we were free to go on pass a little after 1,200 hours each day. They strictly held to that policy. Most of the patients knew they would return to active duty shortly, so they were living it up, going to Paris and see how much trouble they could get into. I did not have the motivation or the inclination. As a consequence, I pretty well kept to myself. I suppose there are some people I could feel comfortable with and go on pass with them, walk around town and see the sights, have something to eat, and finally return to the hospital. I much preferred to meet Renee each day and be in her company. For the next 2 weeks, I saw Renee each day and got to know her fairly well. Most of the questions about her were answered or resolved in some fashion. I did not fully understand her innate desire for the life she chose, but I did perceive and grasp her motivation for doing so. I knew full well that I would never dispel her resolutions. I would meet her at her home occasionally, but most of the time we met at the metro station in Paris and would take off from there. We would ride the metro to the Champ de Mars station and spend the afternoon at the Eiffel Tower. We would climb the 1,069-foot tower to the top. The elevators were not working, and gaze at the magnificent view from that vantage point. Do you remember those beautiful views?
Yeah.
Was there a restaurant on top?
Oh, on top, yeah. Beautiful restaurant.
Why weren't the elevators working?
No power.
Shut down for the war?
No power.
Okay.
They didn't get the part to fix it.
The whole panoramic of the sign below unfolded before us. It was inspirational to behold. We also got a tremendous impression of the Palais de Charlotte, the complex along the sign that housed 4 museums, theaters, and a concert hall. I would put my arm around her, and she would be embarrassed because of her lovely hair was being blown about by the wind on top of the tower. She would constantly be pushing it away from her face, and I would steal a kiss to add to her frustration. It was cold and windy on the outside, and we decided to seek shelter on the second level, which had a restaurant and lounge rooms overlooking the sign. Renee would order something, and I always liked when she spoke her native tongue. She would speak rapidly and would communicate her words distinctly and with much enthusiasm. She ordered a seafood platter with French fries and a carafe of wine. Once again, I complimented her on her selection. She would smile, smooth her hair, or adjust her sitting position, anything to negate my complimenting her. It was one of those little idiosyncrasies that I got to admire and look forward to. Renee asked about my experiences in the hospital, and I guess I reacted the same way she would. I would shrug them off, being inconsequential, and state there were many soldiers a great deal worse than I. She triggered a sensitive spot, and I started to talk about Fink and Lape, and a great remorse, and sincerely became attentive to what I was saying about them. What happened to Fink and Lape?
Well, they both got killed.
They're both your friends, they both got killed. Okay. Did you pull the dog tags off each one of them?
Right?
Did you pull Fink's and Lape's dog tags off of them when they got killed to send them home?
I took one dog tag off, but one on his neck.
Okay. For further
No,
identification.
I didn't send him home. I sent him to the administration.
And then they sent him home.
Yeah.
And you left one dog tag on him for the sake of later identifying the
Yeah.
body. I felt I would have got more in depth about Fink and Lape, but I believe she sensed that it was having a depressing effect on me, and I did not pursue it any further. I noticed when I met her at the metro station, as she stood at the automatic ticket bearing, waiting for me, there was wearing a slick, tight skirt with high heels. She also had a rather tight-fitting wool sweater jacket with accented her attractive figure. I remarked about her appearance and how great she looked, and she was pleased but said nothing. My first reaction was she wanted to de-emphasize the fact that she has been a novice, and I did not want to interfere with the short time we had left together. That's when she related to her religious experience. To me meant a great deal, for I do not believe Renee would have divulged her inner conscious proclivity unless she felt comfortable with that particular person. I knew the feeling very well, and it was one of the many traits we had in common. Contrary to my own opinion, Renee was going through a difficult period of adjustment, and I realized rather late that I entered into her thoughts as she strived for some equilibrium and stability. She was attempting to be truthful and forthcoming with me, and I felt I should do the same toward her.
You had that radio on, huh?
Even so, I felt I would not relate to a full extent of my feelings towards her, since I believed she would re-enter the religious order, and I did not want to influence her decision. Even so, I was pleased and thrilled when she came up to me, kissed me, and took my arm as we left the station. Perhaps she was pleading for my assistance and aiding in her decision, and I should have recognized it as such. She might have been looking toward me as helper, but would not intercede in her decision maker. And on my own decisiveness hindered our relationship. As for not relating my true feelings towards her and not influencing her decision, it was complete avoidance and retreat to my evasive self. I could not make a mature judgment decision on the person I truly loved and instead clouded it with pseudo-jargon, deceiving both of us. In essence, I knew I should have pursued Renee's forthrighting with due diligence, stated my true feeling towards her, and made it known that I wanted to make a life with her, come what may. With that approach, I believe Renee would have been a respected painter and perhaps a happy housewife with a loving husband and several darling children. Instead, the way it finally evolved was she went off to French Guiana and sacrificed her life for an ennobled cause. Enough of the digressing. As I talked about Fink and others, recounting my experience, Renee listened, fingering her glass of wine. I told her how we met at Breckenridge, our training together, and finally going overseas. She would take a sip of wine, fold her arms before her on the table, and become fully absorbed in what I was relating to her. When I talked about Fink's death and how badly it affected me, I could sense a great swelling of compassion and sympathy in her face and eyes. She took hold of my hand and held it firmly as I told her about Leip and other members of the squad and how I felt indirectly responsible for their tragic deaths. She let go of my hand and raised her hand and repeated several times, "Non, non, you must not think like that. It's not your fault." She pleaded with me. Her eyes were moist and it touched me deeply that she cared enough for that sort of reaction. "I'm sorry I upset you," I murmured, and took her hand in mine, and she smiled, brushing a tear from her eyelash. Minutes?
16.
As I looked at her struggling to regain her composure, I knew within me this would be a person that I would start a life with anew. I also knew with much conviction it would never come to pass. What was tearing us apart? My indecisiveness and my immature nature, or Renee's ambiguity and maturity? We both had our own crosses to bear. I had my mother, and Renee had her religion. Neither one of us could completely banish them from our existence. We finished our wine after paying for our lunch, and we walked towards a stairwell down the flight of stairs to the street level. We crossed Champ de Mars at the stone bridge We crossed Champ de Mars.
Is that a river, Champ de Mars?
Champ de Mars, is that a street or a bridge?
What?
Champ de Mars, is that a river or a bridge? Champ de Mars. Is that a river? You said, we walked towards the stairwell, down the flight of stairs to street level. We crossed the Champ de Mars and the stone bridge. That's a street.
What's the name of it?
Champ de Mars.
French?
Yeah. Is that the street? Yeah. And the stone bridge over the sign to the Palace du Chalat. There was a recital in progress, and we took the seats at the back of the hall. I took Renee's hand, and we listened to the string quartet, and I could see that she was very moved by their performance. She looked and smiled at me occasionally, distracted slightly that she was so absorbed by the music. After the recital, we toured several museums and finally walked through the promenade onto the Jardin du Trocadero, a park-like setting featuring many illuminated fountains. We walked around the lake until we came to a bench and sat down to watch the swans swim again. Do they have many swans in the lake?
Oh, yeah.
Was there a lot of museums in the area you were in Paris?
What?
In the area that you're in Paris, was there a lot of museums?
A lot of museums?
Yeah.
Yeah, cultural museums, yeah.
Do you think they're still there today?
Probably sure.
They didn't get bombed?
They probably got sacrificed. They got sacrificed.
Okay, okay. And how about most of the Catholic churches in Paris? Did they get bombed?
Who?
The Catholic churches in Paris, did they get bombed?
Well, maybe indirectly they misfired or something, but they were told not to destroy churches or hospitals or residential areas.
How about the Eiffel Tower? Did that have any damage?
No.
Okay. Renee took my arm and looking into the lake whispered, "You did not like all the German paintings and portraits at the studio."
Those things.
You did not, Renee said you did not like all the German portraits at the studio. You didn't like all the portraits.
Well, the one she was painting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
You didn't like it, did you?
Well, she was an informer and she's making money on it, yeah.
I was taken aback by her disclosure, and I did not expect it, and stammered in desperation to think of something that would not express my true feelings. I finally said I did not expect to see them in the company of a French citizen. She sat quietly for a moment and said softly, "We had 4 years of German occupation. I was 20 years old when it started in the Christmas of 1939. So the Germans were there for 4 long years.
Oh, yeah. Occupied.
And then the American Army drove them out, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank God. Thank God. She shifted about on the bench, sat rigid with both of her knees together, then continued. "I was in Rouen Monastery, completely my novitiate. After hesitating for a moment, she said, I was not allowed to go home for Christmas as I was concluding my 2nd year and would be attaining my habit." Renee became stoic and appeared distant as she recalled when the German Luftwaffe started to bomb Rouen nightly. So the monastery she was at, the Germans started bombing. She would, along with the other sisters at the monastery, aid the injured and the homeless and bury the dead. It was during this period that she learned about her father's death by the Germans in Paris, and a little later, the ultimate death of her mother. So the Germans killed the mother, the father, and the brother.
Why?
I don't know, it's in your book. It said in here she told you that the Germans killed her mother, father, and brother. The bombing of the city increased relentlessly, until one night the monastery and convent took a direct hit, killing and injuring many nuns and priests. Many in their class were either injured or killed, and she herself sustained some injuries, but would not elaborate on it. She paused once again and looked at me momentarily, then continued in a low, subdued voice. Those remaining in the order were sheltered in a large farmhouse several miles outside the city. It was there that I began to have misgivings and uncertainty about my faith and vows. I began to become more irresolute. She stopped once again and peered out into the lake. I took her hand and it was icy cold and trembling. She began again. My final decision came when I learned two of my brother's death in the service. Minutes?
8.
I felt the order shortly thereafter. I left the order thereafter and returned to Paris. She looked pale and almost ghost-like as she looked away from me, her thoughts far into the distant past. I could see that it was very difficult for her to talk further about it, as it awakened old, painful memories. She got up from the bench and walked to the awkward old painful memories. She got up from the bench and walked to the edge of the lake and stood there looking out. I walked over to her hand, put my arms around her, and it was then that she started to weep softly. I heard her. I held her, not really knowing what to say, feeling her pain and anguish as she trembled in my arms. I could not stay there any longer. She sobbed, burying her head into my shoulder. I lost my faith along with my entire family. She peered into my eyes, wiping her tears away. I have nothing now except my paintings, she whimpered. God shall have taken them away also. Don't you see? She laminated, looking at me. I am no longer privileged to have the faith, and if I don't have that, I have nothing. Roman Catholic faith, that is, by the way. She returned to the bench and sat at the edge of it. She had stopped crying and quietly sat there, wiping her tears away from her cheeks with the handkerchief I had given her. I sat down next to her and took her hand and held it. As I looked at her, she appeared more saintly than at any other time I had seen her. God did not denounce you, I said gently. He was only testing your faith and love of him. I continued to hold her hand as she slowly recovered her composure. We had better go, it's almost dark, she said softly, still holding my hand tightly. We walked back to the Palace de Chalet and recognized the familiar large M with the circle at the far end of the building. It was the metro station as we got closer. We could see distinctive curly green railings and archways bearing the full title, Metropolitan. Renee stated we should take the number 8 line, which would take her to Boulevard Street, St. Michel's, and from there we could make a correspondence connection to Car de Bouchy, which was within her neighborhood. I purchased a ticket for Renee and entered the metro platform. She slid her ticket into the automatic ticket bearer. As it popped up at the other end of the barrier, she picked it up and we would need it for our correspondence to St. Michel's. The train was relatively empty and there was no serviceman on board, which disturbed me slightly. Why did it bother you on the train at the metro there wasn't any servicemen?
Well, she felt lonely. She felt
you said it
insecure.
bothered-
She felt insecure.
You said it bothered you that there was no servicemen on the train you're at.
Yeah,
You're the only one in uniform.
yeah.
Why did that bother you?
Well, they probably thought I was a deserter or something else, and they probably thought to shoot me.
Oh, okay. Okay, I understand. I understand perfectly well. The trains are open plan cars, corral, and extremely quiet. It was a short ride, about 20 minutes at the most, and I could see the junction station up ahead and an illuminated orange sign marking the line terminal. We exited to the bright blue sign marked sortie or exit and boarded the metro car to Carrefour de Bouchy. In 5 minutes we arrived at the station. I could begin to pick out the landmarks that were familiar to me. I knew Renee did not live far from here. For the first time, I felt a little apprehensive around Renee as she was extremely quiet. It was early 1930 hours, and I asked Renee if she liked something to eat, as we have not eaten for some time. She stated that she was not hungry and would like some coffee. We walked a bit and found a little indoor cafe as the night air became cool and damp. Was Paris generally cool and damp?
The what?
Was Paris generally cool and damp? Cool and damp, Paris.
Paris?
Yeah, the climate, cool and damp.
Yeah. Well, that was the time of year.
Yeah,
They had the same temperature zone we had.
that's interesting. Minutes?
Oh, a minute and a half.
Oh,
As we sat with our coffee, Renee asked if I wanted to see her tomorrow. I quickly replied, most certainly, for the next week or so. She smiled that infectious smile and put her hand on top of mine. We are alike, she sighed, even though we appear to be so different. I smiled and told her that her English was 100% improved these last several days. Minutes?
40 seconds.
With the first display all day, she explained, "Look at what I have found for a teacher." I replied, "Now teach me French that quickly." We both laughed and I was relieved to see that she had recovered from her feelings and desolation before I had to leave for the hospital.
All right, let's wrap it up then for
Seconds.
today. 20. So,
I then asked her what was on the agenda for tomorrow. She seemed mystified and I realized she did not understand the word agenda.
oh, okay. All right, so we'll pick it up again in a minute.